Random Korean imports. You know, Rakas Wadid, he does a good bit. He talks about how he's kind of just, another random Korean. Believe in me, guys, I'm not just another random Korean. But all sorts of Korean players keep coming to the League of Legends Championship Series, and a lot of them, you look at the roster, you look at the announcement, and you instantly feel like, yeah, this guy is not going to do well. I mean, organizations throw around the same name over and over again. They ask people off-season who are a little bit more informed and say, like, what do you think about player X? And I've already done the organizational perspective. I have already talked about the lack of scouting, the lack of research, and how difficult that is in different videos. But one thing I haven't touched on enough is the LCS player perspective, which is definitely a large factor. So just humor me for a second. Take a moment and imagine that you're a professional League of Legends player. And when I say a professional League of Legends player, I don't mean SK Telecom shaking hands on stage with Ronaldo. I don't mean after a year and a half of going to international events and not having success, you make it to the mid-season invitational final and you solo kill Faker right away in the first 5 minutes of game 1. I don't mean that kind of player. I don't mean that kind of team. I mean an LCS player who's just sort of starting out, who's trying to make it, who's trying to get to that level. Maybe he's spent, or you have spent, a couple of years in the Challenger Series, and you just had your first split in the League of Legends Championship Series. It was really cool. You had the opportunity to play against some of these best guys on stage. You learned a lot, and maybe you didn't start out and you weren't the best, but you actually really, really used the opportunity and you improved a lot individually. The problem is that your team wasn't good, or you didn't click well with the other players and there was just a systemic flaw there, and you end up in the bottom spot. You end up having to play the promotion series and you get relegated after losing 2 best-of-5s in a row. Wow. That's just, I mean, the feeling of crushing disappointment and the fact that you're going back to CS. You know what it's like to be in CS, that you don't have the same kind of stage opportunities. You don't have the same environment. Maybe the standard of the gaming house isn't as high in some of the CS teams you've been at. Maybe the standard of teammates, the standard of opponents, the amount of in-houses that you get invited to, these types of things, they're just not up to par. But then, the pain is lifted a bit because an LCS org, an organization that just bought an LCS spot, comes to you and says, we're really impressed with your play and we want you to join our team. That's the validation that you wanted, because yes, you knew you should not have been relegated, that you are an LCS caliber player, that you really, really gained a lot from that split and people were going to notice you. And they did. It was great. It's awesome. It's an amazing feeling. But then after that short honeymoon phase ends, you start talking about the roster a little bit. And the names that they're giving you aren't that appealing. Maybe you've played with one of these guys before, and you know that when it gets really, really difficult, he tunnel visions and talks on his phone too much with his old high school friends, right? He doesn't play the game as much. Maybe he plays just a little bit too much Hearthstone. Oldie but goodie. And the other guy, maybe you don't know him too well, right? But you pull up Skype with some of your LCS buddies who have played on him before. It's like, nah, brah, nah. He's got a secret, okay? He doesn't play this champion. And as soon as the meta changes, it's screwed. It's over. It's done for you. So you say, I'm going to take a couple days, think about it, maybe get back to you, start talking to your CS offers a little bit more, see how those rosters are shaping up. And the guy's doing the recruiting for the new LCS team. He comes back to you in the 2 days and he says, okay, those players that we were not going to talk about those players anymore, okay? Just forget about those players. Those guys, they're gone. Nope, nothing's got it. It's good. We're good. We're getting Koreans. That kind of situation is going to be really appealing to a player like that, because it's instantly a dissymmetry of information, right? It's instantly this guy that could be much better than these other guys, because there is a platonic ideal of Korean players. You see these guys on stage right? In the mid-season invitational, you see them winning things. You see them doing really, really well. You've seen teams in your region succeed with Korean imports, and you know the reputation is just that their work ethic is insane, right? It's just out of this world. But the problem is that every single teammate is going to have their strengths and weaknesses. There is no such thing as a perfectly good, ideal, platonic ideal of a teammate. There just isn't one. So whatever strengths and weaknesses you saw in these players, whatever flaws that they had, there will be also flaws on these Korean players. The problem is that you just don't know them, right? You just don't know what those flaws are, and maybe they aren't compatible with your own flaws, because if you ask yourself what type of teammate you are, if you're really honest, there are going to be some there. These are some of the issues. So how do we combat the dissymmetry of information? How do we combat the rose-colored glasses of this guy who just eagerly, he's so hungry for it. He wants to be back in LCS. He deserves to be back in LCS. How do organizations combat that to maybe not go for this Korean name who has been at the 2013 World Championship when a certain champion was really, really good and then hasn't had as much success since then, right? How do we combat the desire to have that kind of player just because of a dissymmetry of information? Well, there's a really easy solution. Find out the information. Make sure the dissymmetry of information is gone. I think for some reason, we have this illusion that we can't talk to players in China or players in Korea as easily as we can talk to players in NA and EU. And that's true, right? It's not as easy, but you can talk to them. People on Weibo, I'm pretty open to DMs, to being chatted with if you can prove your identity, if you can prove that you're an LCS player or an LCS team who's looking at this kind of Korean player that's previously been on this team. You can actually talk to them and ask them, and maybe they won't be as upfront about it as you might want, but why did Invictus Gaming let Kakao go and keep Rookie? You know? These types of questions are really, really relevant, and people haven't really bothered to ask them or to bother to contact anyone. There's a lot of surprising amount of English speaking on Chinese and Korean teams, and maybe even go the extra mile and get an actual translator or someone who knows these teams and these organizations. Do actual interviews, have your players talk to some of these players, figure out how this is going to work out. The same process that can be applied to these EU or players or NA players that you're looking at can also be applied to imports. It's just that it takes more time, and I think that's and more research, watching the actual games, which you probably haven't already watched, these types of situations, and I think that's the big barrier to entry, and people would rather not know. It's they actually would rather not know. They would like to assume that this player will automatically be a better option than the other ones because they want to stay in LCS this time. And if they don't have the information, they might not go the extra mile to dig it up. So this option sounds better because you have SKT tagged in front of Profit's name. So SKT top laner is instantly very appealing. But I mean, have SKT players been universally successful on other teams? Well, I mean, Piglet just almost got relegated on Team Liquid. Tom was a substitute player for SKT. He didn't have that much success when he went to QG/newbie in China, right? If organizations are on their end also going to be really, really excited for this player to join the team, they want the player to be excited. If the player is going to be happy about this idea of a Korean import, it's sometimes just easy to let him be happy about the idea of the Korean import rather than giving him the information on why one of these other players or other options might be better, right? It might be easy for that player to focus on what he did that let the team down rather than remembering some of the strengths and some of the ways that you can work on that. And if you already know the flaws of the players that you're contracting, you can come in with ways to deal with it, maybe take that guy's cell phone away. Generally speaking, I feel the flaws you know are sometimes easier to manage, or the players that you know a little bit more about are sometimes easier to set up systems for or set up things like this. It's because you have to get away from the idea that there is a platonic ideal of a good player or a platonic ideal of a good teammate, because you're going to import flaws as much as you're going to import skill. And you have to have a good idea of how much you're getting of both and what these are before you can ever even have a successful team. And this goes for domestic players, this goes for imports. So if you don't have the time, short off seasons don't have a lot of time, maybe just don't do it.